The Long Hunters, America's forgotten explorers before the Revolution. Long before the United States became an independent nation. Before highways crossed the mountains and before busy towns filled the western valleys. An immense wilderness covered much of North America. Endless forests stretched beyond the horizon. Ancient rivers flowed through quiet valleys. Thick morning mist drifted between towering trees. And only the songs of birds disturbed the silence. Few Europeans had ever walked these lands. And fewer still had returned to describe them. Our story begins in the summer of 1769, along the western edge of Britain's American colonies. Here, a handful of experienced woodsmen prepare to leave the last small frontier settlement behind. They are not soldiers, merchants, or wealthy landowners. They are known as Long Hunters, men who disappear into the wilderness for many months, living entirely from their skill, patience, and knowledge of nature. The settlement slowly wakes beneath a pale sunrise. Thin smoke rises from stone chimneys. Wooden cabins stand quietly beside narrow dirt paths. A horse drinks from a shallow stream while chickens wander between rough fences. Everything feels calm, as though the frontier itself is taking one final breath before the hunters vanish into the unknown. Each man carries only what he truly needs. Across his shoulder rests a long flintlock rifle. At his belt hangs a small hunting knife beside a leather pouch filled with lead balls and a powder horn containing black gunpowder, a rolled wool blanket, a simple cooking pot, and a light tomahawk complete nearly all he owns for the journey ahead. Their clothing is made for survival rather than appearance. Loose linen hunting shirts fall nearly to the knees. Soft buckskin leggings protect their legs from sharp branches. Quiet leather moccasins leave almost no sound upon the forest floor. Wide-brimmed felt hats shield their faces from summer sun and sudden rain. Without ceremony, the men step beyond the final cabin. Behind them lies the edge of civilization. Ahead waits a forest so vast that no accurate map can fully describe it. Every mile forward leads deeper into a land shaped only by rivers, mountains, wildlife, and time itself. The morning air is cool and carries the scent of pine, damp earth, and wild flowers. Sunlight slips gently through the high branches as the Long Hunters begin their silent journey westward, disappearing one careful step at a time beneath the endless green canopy. The forest quickly swallowed every sign of the settlement behind them. Untold. The narrow footpath faded into little more than a line of flattened leaves. Towering white oaks, chestnut trees, tulip poplars, and tall pines formed a living roof overhead, allowing only scattered beams of sunlight to reach the ground. Ferns covered the forest floor, while moss spread across fallen logs softened by many years of rain and snow. The hunters walked in single file, keeping several steps between one another. Their movements were steady and unhurried. Dry branches were carefully avoided, and every footstep was placed with quiet purpose. Speaking was unnecessary. Each man understood the rhythm of the journey and listened instead to the sounds surrounding him. A gentle breeze carried the distant call of a wood thrush. Somewhere high above, a red-tailed hawk circled slowly through the clear blue sky. Small gray squirrels raced along rough tree bark, while colorful butterflies drifted through warm patches of sunlight. The wilderness seemed peaceful, yet every living creature remained alert. Near midday, the men reached a narrow creek flowing over smooth stones. Crystal clear water reflected the bright summer sky as it wound silently between moss-covered banks. One by one, they filled their wooden flasks, washed the dust from their hands, and rested only a few quiet moments before continuing west. The land gradually became steeper. Thick tree roots crossed the hillside like natural steps, and loose rocks shifted beneath their moccasins. Climbing required patience rather than speed. From the top of the ridge, Endless waves of green forest stretched toward the distant horizon, broken only by winding rivers and blue mountain peaks fading into soft haze. As afternoon sunlight slowly turned golden, fresh deer tracks appeared in the damp earth beside a patch of wild grass. One hunter knelt carefully to examine them. The prints were clear, sharp, and only a few hours old. Without exchanging many words, the group quietly changed direction, following the trail deeper into the untouched wilderness, where another peaceful evening slowly approached. The fresh tracks led through a quiet valley where the forest opened just enough for warm sunlight to reach the ground. Tall grasses swayed gently in the afternoon breeze, and clusters of wildflowers added soft shades of blue, yellow, and white beneath the towering trees. A narrow game trail wound between the bushes, used for countless seasons by deer moving between water and shelter. The long hunters slowed their pace even further. Every movement became deliberate. One man raised his hand, signaling the others to stop. They listened carefully. The distant murmur of flowing water mixed with the rustle of leaves overhead. Somewhere beyond the trees came the faint sound of branches bending under. Careful footsteps. A young white-tailed buck stepped into a small clearing. Its ears turned in every direction, searching for danger. Sunlight reflected across its smooth brown coat, while it lowered its head to feed on fresh grass. The hunters remained completely still. Even the smallest sound might send the animal disappearing into the forest. After several quiet moments, one hunter slowly lifted his flintlock rifle. He breathed calmly, waiting for the perfect moment. The crack of black powder echoed through the valley, startling birds into the air. Thick white smoke drifted between the trees. When it cleared, the deer lay motionless upon the grass. The men approached with quiet respect. Nothing would be wasted. Fresh meat would provide food for several days, while the hide could later be cleaned, stretched, and traded in the eastern settlements. Every successful hunt meant greater security during the long months ahead. As the sun slipped lower behind the distant ridges, they searched for a safe place to spend the night. Near a gentle stream stood a group of enormous oak trees whose broad branches offered shelter from evening dew. Fallen limbs provided dry firewood, and smooth stones formed a natural circle for a small cooking fire. Soon, thin smoke rose quietly through the branches. Strips of venison roasted over glowing coals while iron pots warmed fresh spring water. The forest gradually grew darker. Daytime birds fell silent, replaced by the soft calls of owls hidden among the ancient trees. Above the wilderness, the first bright stars slowly appeared in the clear summer sky, marking the end of their first successful day deep within America's untamed frontier. Night settled gently across the wilderness. The small campfire burned with a steady glow, its light reaching only a few feet before fading into complete darkness. Beyond the circle of warmth, the great forest remained, hidden beneath tall trees in a sky filled with countless stars. The air became cooler with every passing hour, carrying the clean scent of pine, damp leaves, and fresh water from the nearby stream. The hunters finished their simple evening meal without haste. Roasted venison cornmeal and cool spring water were enough after a long day of walking. Every bite mattered. Supplies had to last for many months, and nothing was ever wasted. Bones would later become useful tools, while strips of meat would be carefully dried above gentle smoke. For the journey ahead, one hunter quietly added another piece of oak wood to the fire. Tiny sparks floated upward before disappearing into the darkness. Another carefully inspected his flintlock rifle, cleaning away the black powder residue left from the afternoon hunt. A dependable rifle required constant attention. In the wilderness, neglect could easily become dangerous. No tents stood around the fire. Instead, each man unrolled a thick wool blanket beneath the shelter of the great oak trees. Their hats rested beside them, while rifles remained close enough to reach within seconds. Although the forest appeared peaceful, experience had taught them never to ignore the sounds of the night. Far away, a barred owl called through the darkness. Tree frogs answered from the stream. Crickets filled the cool air with a steady chorus that never seemed to end. Ocasionaji. Leaves rustled as small animals searched for food beneath the fallen branches. Every sound blended naturally into the quiet rhythm of the ancient forest. One hunter remained awake as the first watchman while the others rested. His task was simple but important. He slowly walked around the edge of the camp, watching the shadows beyond the firelight and listening to every unfamiliar noise. Abobeim. The bright band of the Milky Way stretched from one side of the sky to the other, shining over a wilderness that few people from the eastern colonies would ever witness. The fire continued to glow softly as midnight approached, and the long hunters rested peacefully beneath the endless canopy of stars, ready to greet another unknown day in the vast American frontier. Before the first hint of sunrise reached the eastern horizon, the watchman quietly awakened the others. The camp remained silent as each hunter folded his blanket and secured his few belongings. The fire had burned down to a bed of glowing embers, to leave as little trace as possible. They scattered cool ashes, covered the fire pit with soil, and returned loose leaves across the ground. Within minutes, the campsite looked almost untouched. A thin layer of mist drifted above the nearby stream, moving slowly between smooth stones and low bushes. The morning air felt cool against their faces, and tiny drops of dew covered every blade of grass. As the first birds greeted the coming day, pale golden light filtered through the towering trees, revealing another endless stretch of untouched forest. The hunters ate a simple breakfast of dried venison and coarse cornmeal before beginning their march. No one hurried. Long journeys demanded steady strength rather than speed. Their moccasins pressed softly into the damp earth, leaving faint footprints that would soon disappear beneath falling leaves and changing weather. The land gradually descended into a broad valley where giant sycamore trees lined the banks of a slow-moving river. Its surface reflected the brightening sky like polished glass. Fallen logs rested along the shoreline, while clusters of reeds swayed gently with the current. Fresh animal tracks surrounded the muddy edges of the water. Deer, raccoons, wild turkeys, and smaller woodland creatures had all visited during the night. One hunter knelt beside a large print pressed deeply into the soft mud. The rounded shape and long claw marks revealed that a black bear had passed only hours earlier. The men studied the tracks quietly before continuing. Bears usually avoided people, yet every encounter demanded caution and respect. A kingfisher suddenly flashed across the river, its blue feathers shining in the morning light before disappearing downstream. Turtles rested on sunlit rocks near the opposite bank, slipping silently into the water whenever the hunters approached. Everywhere, the wilderness moved at its own calm and unchanging rhythm. Crossing the river required patience. They selected a shallow section where the current flowed gently over flat stones, holding their rifles high to keep the powder dry. The long hunters stepped carefully through the cold water. One by one, they reached the opposite bank, paused briefly to inspect their equipment, and then disappeared, once more beneath the deep green forest that stretched endlessly before them. Beyond the river, the landscape slowly changed. The towering hardwood forest gave way to scattered groves where sunlight reached the ground more easily. Young maple trees grew among flowering dogwoods, and open meadows appeared between the wooded hills. Wild grasses rose almost to the hunter's knees, bending gently beneath the warm summer breeze. The long hunters followed the edge of the meadow instead of crossing its center. Moving beneath the trees offered shade and made them less visible to wildlife. Every few hundred yards, they paused to observe the land ahead. Careful observation was a habit that had kept experienced woodsmen alive for many years. Near a patch of blackberry bushes, fresh signs of wild turkeys covered the ground. Feathers rested among the grass, and small tracks led toward a nearby thicket. The birds themselves were nowhere to be seen, but their presence reminded the hunters that food could usually be found by those willing to watch patiently. By late morning, the sun climbed higher into a cloudless sky. The air became warmer, and insects drifted lazily through narrow beams of light. Honeybees moved from flower to flower, while bright dragonflies hovered above a quiet marsh at the edge of the valley. Every corner of the wilderness seemed filled with quiet life. The men stopped beneath several enormous walnut trees to rest for a short time. One hunter used his tomahawk to split a fallen branch into smaller pieces for future firewood. Another carefully checked the leather stitching on his moccasins. Small repairs made during peaceful moments often prevented greater problems later in the journey. As they continued westward, the ground became softer beneath their feet. Thick moss covered ancient rocks, and shallow pools reflected the passing clouds above. A narrow spring bubbled from the hillside, its water so clear that every pebble beneath the surface could be counted. The hunters refilled their flasks and enjoyed the cold, fresh water before moving on. Toward the afternoon, the forest grew quieter than before. Even the birds seemed unusually still. Only the gentle whisper of leaves and the distant sound of flowing water accompanied their steady footsteps. Without speaking, the long hunters remained alert, disappearing deeper into the vast wilderness, where every new mile revealed another peaceful corner of the untamed American frontier. As the afternoon slowly passed, the hunters entered an older section of forest where many of the trees had stood for centuries. Massive white oaks spread heavy branches across the sky, while towering tulip poplars rose like great wooden pillars. Their thick trunks were covered with patches of green moss and pale grey lichen. The air beneath the ancient canopy was noticeably cooler. Sunlight filtered through countless layers of leaves, creating shifting patterns of light and shadow across the ground. Small ferns grew between weathered rocks, and clusters of mushrooms appeared on old fallen logs slowly returning to the earth. A gentle breeze carried the scent of cedar, damp bark, and distant water. Somewhere ahead, a narrow creek wound through the trees, its steady murmur becoming clearer with every step. Before reaching it, the hunters noticed several tall beech trees marked with old claw scratches. The lines had darkened with age, suggesting that black bears had visited the area during many previous seasons. When they reached the creek, the water flowed quietly around smooth stones polished by countless years of current. Tiny fish darted through the shallow pools, while water striders skimmed lightly across the surface. Along the muddy bank, fresh raccoon tracks crossed beside the delicate prints of foxes and wild turkeys, each telling a silent story of the night's activity. The hunters rested only briefly. One man sat upon a fallen log and carefully adjusted the leather strap supporting his powder horn. Another sharpened the edge of his hunting knife using a smooth river stone. Their movements were calm and unhurried, practiced through years spent far from settlements. As evening approached, the sky above the treetops turned a softer shade of blue. Golden light touched the highest branches, before slowly slipping lower into the valley. A pair of white-tailed deer appeared across the creek, pausing for a quiet drink before disappearing among the trees without. Sensing the men nearby, the long hunters rose once more and continued west, following the gentle course of the creek through the endless forest. Behind them, the fading sunlight left the woodland wrapped in peaceful shadows, while ahead another night in the untamed American wilderness quietly awaited their arrival. The hunters chose to camp beside the creek before darkness fully settled across the valley. The ground was dry, shaded by a circle of towering hemlock and oak trees whose wide Branches offered natural protection from the cool night air. Nearby, the clear stream curved gently around a bed of smooth stones, producing a soft, steady sound that never seemed to fade. Before making camp, each man completed familiar tasks without needing instruction. One gathered fallen branches for the fire. Another filled the cooking pot with fresh spring water. A third cleared away leaves and small stones, creating a level place where blankets could be spread for the night. Years in the wilderness had turned these simple routines into quiet habits. As the fire slowly came to life, thin blue smoke drifted upward through the trees. The hunters hung narrow strips of venison above the gentle heat, allowing the meat to dry slowly instead of cooking too quickly. Preserving food was essential during long expeditions, and every successful hunt helped extend their journey deeper into the frontier. The evening remained calm. A cool breeze stirred the branches overhead while the last rays of sunlight disappeared beyond the western hills. Fireflies began to appear among the bushes, their tiny lights blinking softly in the growing darkness. Along the edge of the creek, frogs called to one another, joined by the steady chorus of crickets hidden beneath the grass. After supper, one hunter unfolded a worn piece of animal hide on which a rough map had been drawn with charcoal. Rivers, mountain ridges, and familiar hunting grounds were marked only by simple lines and symbols. Much of the land ahead remained blank, reminding them that large portions of the wilderness were still unknown to European explorers. The map was carefully rolled and returned to its leather case. Tomorrow would bring another day of quiet travel through forests that few people had ever seen. One by one, the hunters settled beside the fading fire, listening to the gentle sound of flowing water as the stars slowly filled the clear summer sky above the endless American frontier.